3, 2.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. Keisha Davis, the county's health officer, Dr. Nina Ashford, Chief of Public Health Services, Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Deputy Chief of Public Health Services, Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, and our guest today is Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service Chief Corey Smedley. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, Mr. County Executive.
Good afternoon to you, and thanks everybody for joining us. Gore Vidal once referred to this nation as the United States of amnesia. I bring this phrase up today because I remain baffled on the results of last night after the chaos and division of the first Trump term that culminated with an attack on our democracy, including an attempt to overthrow the government. It is hard to believe that people have forgotten about that or continue to think it didn't happen. I said many times in this media briefing that I believe the Biden-Harris administration is the most productive and successful for American working families since FDR. Locally, and more specifically about this office, it was not a surprise to me that the term limits referendum passed. You've got Republicans who couldn't beat me in a one-on-one election. You got the developers who couldn't beat me one-on-one after spending millions of dollars trying to do that twice. And they faced an election in 2 years. The best strategy, as they knew, was to try to knock me out by using term limits. They didn't tell people that the executive already had term limits. And I know that because that's what I heard when I listened to them solicit signatures for their petitions. They're smart, and they're smart enough to lie and misrepresent the truth because that's what Republicans and developers are pretty good at. But we do have some positives from yesterday. Yesterday, we had a successful election in Montgomery County. There were hundreds of election workers and volunteers from both parties that worked together to ensure that everyone who wanted to vote got to vote. Many of those voices across Montgomery County helped carry Angela Alsobrooks to victory in her Senate campaign. Angela in Delaware, Lisa Blunt Rochester became only the third and fourth Black women ever elected to the U.S. Senate. Voters in Montgomery County and in Maryland also overwhelmingly supported protections in our state constitution for our women's reproductive rights. Our state and county will continue to be a safe place for women's health and reproductive freedom. This election does not change who we are as a county. We came together, and we're going to continue to come together, and we'll work against hate and those who promulgate it at every opportunity. We cannot and we will not allow that to change. Election security was a really important issue that people were concerned about here. We did not have any problems. Our county staffed an emergency operations center all day Tuesday. There were no direct threats that were reported ahead of the election day. We did have some department leaders together ready to respond to issues that could have impacted the public's ability to vote, but nothing happened. Unlike 4 years ago, Democrats and those who were not pleased with the results understand how to accept a loss without claiming it was cheated or stolen. There will be a peaceful transfer of power this time, something that the other side actually didn't promise had they lost. But it's sad that we didn't get that impression throughout the election that they were going to accept the results. Just like 2016, we expect there'll be plenty of disbelief, grief, and stress around the results of last night's election. Dr. Davis will talk more about stress and anxiety and how we want to make sure anyone who may be struggling gets help. The county's 24/7 crisis center phone number is 240-777-4000, as well as the national number, which is 988, for anyone to call if they need to. In a few minutes, we're going to invite our Fire Chief Corey Smedley to join me because of the state fire ban that's been put in place and the spate of brush fires in the county that we've seen over the last few days. But first, I'd like to talk about how excited it was for me to be with him and other elected leaders on Friday as we opened up the newest fire station serving Clarksburg. The northern end of Montgomery County is not only growing, but it's prepared to grow even larger. We've needed a way to reach more people with emergency services and to cut down on response times, and this station helps meet that challenge. I want to thank our firefighters and the community for their patience as we completed this project. Our first responders deserve top-notch facilities and resources, and the residents of Clarksburg deserve emergency services that are responsive and reliable as they are anywhere in Montgomery County. We endured one of the warmest Halloweens on record and one of the driest Octobers on record. In fact, the last time we had significant rainfall was when the remnants of Hurricane Helen brought two consecutive days of rain on October 2nd. This unusually dry weather has prompted the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to encourage water conservation. This region's main water source is the Potomac River. Last week, low water levels prompted the Interstate Commission of the Potomac River Basin to monitor the river daily and determine if further action is needed. There's been a lot of discussion, for those of you who aren't aware of it, about Montgomery County and basically Virginia as well, about our future water needs and how are we going to have adequate backup water supply if we need to call on it. The county has water in Seneca, but we also rely primarily on a dam in West Virginia. And there's a concern that that's not going to be adequate should we actually run into serious drought conditions. So there is an ongoing discussion about the need for an additional reservoir more downstream along the Potomac. But back to the conditions in our county, we're like the rest of Maryland, which is all under an open air burn ban. The ban prohibits campfires or charcoal grilling. Propane grills and fires within a furnace or chimney are still allowed. Citations are going to cost first-time offenders $300. I asked Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Chief Corey Smedley to join me today to talk about what a burn ban means for us here. And thank you here for being here, Chief.
Thank you, County Executive Elrich. You'll hear me say often that Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service wants everyone to have a prevention state of mind. We do this three ways. We can notice, we can relate, and we can adapt. So let me start with we can notice. We noticed in 2007 that a law was passed in the state of Maryland, Annotated Code from Natural Resource Article Title 5720, which gives the Secretary of Department of Natural Resources, with the advisement of the Maryland Forest Service, the ability to enact a burn ban. And Secretary Josh Kirsch did in fact execute that burn ban on October 1st of this year. The reasons are as what the county executive stated, but quite often we don't hear about the wildfires in our region, but they do occur. We've had 24 this year already, which have burned about 75 acres throughout the state. We have seen upward of 50% less of the precipitation that we normally see in the month of October. And then the National Weather Service has also not provided us any additional relief within the next few weeks. So that's the reason why the burn ban has occurred. So as it relates to the enforcement part, that's mainly through the Department of Natural Resources and other law enforcement officers locally. We partner with the Department of Environmental Protection and Permitting Services. So if you need a permit to do burning, you can go to 311 to be able to accomplish that permit to burn accordingly and within the law. And then our fire and explosive investigators also will locally respond to calls for service along with our first responder firefighters. Now, the county executive did mention that there is a fine. I can tell you the intent of the law is to ensure that we are properly utilizing the opportunity to burn throughout. So our first order of business is to educate. So there is the ability to enforce with a fine, but I can tell you our first ability is to go out and make sure that we educate our community, communicate what the do's and don'ts are to ensure that everyone is safe. Here's how we can relate. Montgomery County is not used to massive wildfires. However, they do happen. And what's the challenge for us? The challenge for us is we're densely populated, which means that if a wildfire occurs and we don't get rescue services out there in a reasonable amount of time, they can spread to property. And we have a lot of structures throughout Montgomery County, and we don't want the wildfires to occur, and we don't want wildfires to occur to spread to structures and cause additional harm. We have experienced about 6 to 7 acres of wildfire burnage within the last couple of days. We've spent several hours on each of those fires. No one has gotten hurt. We have no reports of anyone hurt. We want to make sure that everyone understands that. How can we adapt? We can adapt by first, when something does occur, you immediately call 911. Quite often we see people try to extinguish it themselves, and then it spreads even further. So we ask that you call 911 immediately and get out of harm's way. We want you to make sure that whatever equipment that you use it to the manufacturer's requirements. Right now, we're changing over to the colder months, so people are starting to use different heaters. So we ask that you get everything inspected by a licensed, certified, reputable company that can do that. Keep your leaves out of any harm's way. Please discard any cigarettes appropriately, and don't discard it in dry grass or leaves, because that also hinders the ability for wildfire, or helps the wildfires to continually spread. Finally, we also are coming up on the holiday season, so there's a lot of partying and other things that you celebrate the holiday season with. So we just ask that you do that responsibly. And if you ever need anything, you can always call us to help you with a fire escape plan, a safety plan, and please check your smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. And with that, I'll stop for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Members of the media, we're going to take questions right now regarding the statewide fire ban and the dry conditions. Only at this time, any elections-related questions will take them towards the end. I see Kate Ryan has her hand up. Good afternoon, Kate. Questions regarding the statewide fire ban and or dry conditions?
Thank you. Yes, on both of these. And Chief, you said that we're not used to large-scale wildfires, but you mentioned we have had some. Can you say what caused the wildfires we did have? And is there any one particular most common threat you see out there? You mentioned, tossing a cigarette, not thinking, hey, that could set grass alight. But talk a little bit more about that and what we should be conscious of.
We've had about 4 or 5 within the last couple, from the weekend through this week. Some have been as related of improperly discarded smoking materials, like cigarettes. One had to do with electric lines. So that was in conjunction with our utility companies. But really, we want to make sure that things like our home use of equipment, storing flammable liquids in the proper containers, in the proper space, making sure that we're not parking vehicles on dry grass or over leaves, because your catalytic converter, your muffler still is able to produce heat, and that can cause a fire. Making sure that you're not dragging metal materials that can spark, things that could light off dry flammable materials, whether that's grass, leaves, or sticks and shrubs. So those are the kind of things that we're really seeing. But we just ask everybody to be vigilant, and if you need additional information, you can contact us through 311 or go to the Department of Environmental Protection's website to get additional information on the ban.
Thank you. And then quick follow-up. I think people think, oh, large fields that you're talking, this must be happening up in the ag reserve. Where are these fires taking place?
So we've had some in Upper Montgomery County. We've had some in the Poolsville area, the Gaithersburg area. So that it's unfortunately in many different spaces in the county, and for many different reasons. But the highest probability that we see is the fact that improper disposal of smoking materials is that cause.
Gotcha. And I promise this is the last one on fire safety in the home. And you've mentioned this, how you place your heaters, for example, if you have a portable heater, or if I have an e-bike and charging that battery, et cetera. Can you just walk us through very briefly some of the things we want to keep in mind?
Yeah. So people probably don't realize the different batteries, lithium ion, et cetera, that exist in your home. So I would strongly suggest you contact us so we can help you walk through that, but ensuring that you're not keeping things plugged up. Keeping your lithium-ion batteries too long because they can overheat. The other stuff as it relates to, we use a lot of extension cords, and sometimes extension cords are used for permanent use and they're a temporary use, and we want to make sure that we won't overheat those extension cords. Yes, we're getting into colder months, so people are trying to stay warm, and sometimes they do that through non-traditional methods, using heaters in the wrong way, using the wrong kind of fueling liquids. So that's why I'm saying to everyone, please ensure that you are taking advantage of the manufacturer's requirements and recommendations and doing that appropriately. I can't stress enough to, before you turn on your heater, before you light your fireplace, please get that inspected by a reputable company that's certified so that you can use that in a proper way.
And I promise this really is the last one. You mentioned that people can, contact their local fire department. They're not going to be like mad at me, or it's okay I won't be bothering them with these questions. I think a lot of people hesitate to use that resource.
Absolutely. They are here for the community. We know that we have a prevention state of mind. We want you to have a prevention state of mind. We go out on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I met with my community risk reduction manager today, and we talked about all the work that's being done. We have installed over 820 smoke alarms to date this year. We've also inspected over 1,500 smoke alarms, and we're slated to do many more. So please reach out to your fire and rescue service. That's why we're here. We want to prevent the incident before we have to respond to it.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any more questions for Chief Smedley? No more questions for the Chief this afternoon? Well, Chief, thank you for joining us. We do know that you have to depart, so feel free to do so. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Mr. County Executive.
Thank you. And thank you, Chief Smedley, for being here today. This week, I also joined county council members and other community leaders in honoring veterans in our county. We held a ceremony paying tribute to the servicemen and women who put their lives on the line for our nation. Hope everyone is able to see the Operation Greenlight themed bus that is on the road now in honor of veterans. It features the U.S. flag, an outline of veterans, and the green lights that are being used nationwide to shine a light on veterans throughout November. That bus will be used on several different routes this month, so it can travel around the county. And you will find county offices lit up every night in Rockville and Veterans Plaza in downtown Silver Spring in green. On Friday, November 8th, Silver Spring Town Center, Inc. will present its 16th annual concert for veterans at the American Legion Post 41, starting at 6 p.m. The county is going to observe Veterans Day on Monday, November 11th, with almost all services here closed. Some exceptions are buses, which will run on a weekend schedule. Recreation and aquatic centers and ABS stores will be open at regular hours. In September, we began an effort to engage as many people as possible in the county regarding our next operating budget. The final community conversation is on Thursday at the Wheaton Community Recreation Center with a Spanish-speaking audience. It begins at 7 p.m. Many people do not realize how many folks in our county need help with food, rent, childcare, and other issues, even after the federal government ended COVID-era assistance. We're working with community partners to address the needs and to increase the efficiency of that help. I host these events to determine what pressing issues need to be addressed with our limited budget. I will always listen to the concerns and try to answer every question the best I can. These events also allow those with questions to potentially meet face-to-face with someone from a department who can address their questions or concerns directly. One of our very real concerns is the impact of this election on the local economy. The defunding of some federal agencies and the possible movement of other agencies out of the DC area brings the serious threat of reduced revenue from displaced federal employees. This is a very real threat, and it's been talked about at the Council of Governments. Potential threat to funding federal programs that bring money to the state and the county could also seriously impact our budget. At this moment, we're planning a budget based on what we know now. But it's possible as the new administration plans unfold, we could face a further reduction in resources, and we're going to have to make changes in the budget should that occur. Our focus will continue to remain on constructing the fiscal year 2026 budget, and using the public feedback is still welcome through our budget, through our public information office, or by emailing me through the county website. One more issue I'd like to address before turning this over is the county council is poised to vote next week on the growth and infrastructure policy. This is another policy from Park and Planning that further reduces the amount of money that we get from the development community in order to pay for needed infrastructure in Montgomery County. We have done this 5 times since 2013. We continue to try to be the cheapest state in the region. And the thinking has always been, if we're the cheapest place to be, development will come here. The fact is that for being cheap, we have absolutely nothing to show for it. Virginia taxes on commercial property are almost 50% higher than ours are. They have enjoyed the bulk of the job growth in the region because with the money they've been able to raise, they've been able to build infrastructure. With the money that we haven't raised, we haven't built any infrastructure. And that goes back to the choices that face the council when we don't make decisions to get enough money from the development community. The choice has always been either we raise taxes on residents, which is pretty much a political non-starter. You might be able to do it for schools, but to do it for development, not so much. The other choice is to do nothing, which is usually what we've been stuck being able to do because without additional revenues, it's very hard to move beyond the level of funding we provide to schools or we provide the transportation. So, I would encourage people, if you're concerned about this, to take the time before next Tuesday to reach out to council members and ask them not to further reduce the amount of money we raise from developers. We're going to have a robust discussion about alternatives to our current taxing structure. We're looking very hard at the system that is used in Northern Virginia, much to their success and much to our chagrin. And before we make further cuts in what we're getting, we're asking for the council to take a pause from making our current situation worse and give us time to work on how we could alternatively fund this budget, minimize the impact on residences, and maximize our ability to build infrastructure. And that is the only way we're going to be able to compete with the counties in Northern Virginia that pour hundreds of millions of dollars into transportation infrastructure every year compared to what we do. So if you got time, write your council members, say, don't proceed with cuts in the revenues that we get from developers at this point. And having said that, I'll turn this over to our health folks to give you the update before you go to media questions.
I'll let Mr. O'Donnell get us kicked off, and then we'll talk about election stress.
Again, we're seeing very little COVID activity right now, but we're starting to see some of the younger kids show up at our outpatient centers with RSV, which is not surprising because this is the time of year that those respiratory diseases tend to spread more. So just a reminder to everyone, if you have not gotten your flu or COVID shot this year, now is a great time to get it before the holidays where you start seeing family.
And no additional updates from me. Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Ashford and Mr. O'Donnell. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I think is on everybody's mind, which is election stress. There were a couple of studies that came out within the last couple of weeks. One showed that cardiovascular events doubled in the 2 days following the 2016 election. And when we look at the 2020 election, cardiovascular events, including heart attacks, were 17% higher in the 5 days following the election compared to the 2-week period before the election. We know that this is a high stress time for folks, not just today, but has been over the last few weeks. And while cardiovascular events are one way that stress might manifest, we know that stress lives in your body, and people may feel it physically in the form of aches, pains, weariness, fatigue, upset stomach, headaches, all of those are physical manifestations of stress. Regardless of how you wanted the election to turn out, you probably may be feeling some of those in the days that are following. And I encourage folks to, as we kind of tread our way through the post-election period, for some, your body will feel some release immediately, and that can also trigger some physical symptoms. But it also can that sadness or anxiety, that chronic stress can sometimes linger for a few weeks. And so the first thing that I say to people is give yourself permission to feel emotion. The emotions that you have are real, and it's okay to recognize them. If you are excited or disappointed, recognize that feeling and then start to move on towards acceptance. If you don't recognize your emotions, then you can't move on for them. So it is okay to feel whatever it is that you are feeling. Second, you may need to take a pause if you are feeling overwhelmed. Set limits on news and social media. You don't need to listen to the constant news stream. Consider turning it off completely or just checking in now and then for updates. I guarantee that if something big happens, you'll hear about it. Stay connected with the ones that you love. Reach out to offer support and to receive support from friends and family and colleagues. Draw on your circle of support. Focus on what you control. You probably can't control the election results in some other state. Hopefully you voted, so you can control what you did here, but you can't control all of it. So figure out what your locus of control is, and worry about that. That will help you bring calm. Practice mindfulness. Take a moment to just pause, take a deep breath. If you need to step away for a moment, then do that. Get moving, get outside. Today is beautiful. It's 80 degrees. Don't miss the opportunity to see the fall colors, especially today when it's so nice outside. Even brief movement, call them movement breaks or movement snacks, as a way to really help to center yourself and stay grounded. Find something that you enjoy, a hobby, reading, sitting, walking, something that's going to get you connected to something that brings you enjoyment and delight. And then lastly, if you're really struggling, then don't be afraid to reach out and say, I need help. It's okay to say I'm not okay. Reach out to a trusted professional, reach out to a trusted friend. Recognize that if things aren't going well for you, don't just sit in that. I remind folks, somebody has sent me a poem. I've seen it several times this morning. The country that you woke up in today is the same country that you went to bed in last night. We are going to be okay. And so I encourage you to take the opportunity to take care of yourself in the midst of everything else. So thank you, Mr. County Executive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Dr. Starter, do you have any remarks this afternoon?
I just wanted to underscore what County Executive said and thank all the election workers and also the support staff that were involved in operating the election. We did have I mentioned this last week in the media briefing, we did have our police special events response team with a sort of what we call as a non-controlled team, which means they're not responding to calls for service, but they were just visiting election sites. There were a few minor, where they got calls for additional support, sometimes traffic related and things of that nature, but nothing major. And they did escort all the ballots as they were transported from the election sites back to the Board of Elections central place. No major issues, but I just wanted to underscore what the county executive said, thanking the election workers, the volunteers, the election judges that are actually still involved in counting mail-in ballots moving forward, but also the support staff from the public safety units and building services team, all of those things that allow us to have the elections and operate them in Montgomery County in a seamless way. So just wanted to underscore that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. Okay, members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for general questions. And I see Brian Sears, Maryland Matters. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, County Executive. I wanted to follow up on your comments about the election and impact of potential budget impact of potential federal government movement. Is it possible for you to quantify the impact or the potential impact on Montgomery County government in terms of its relationship with both federal employment and the economics of federal employment and federal agencies within Montgomery County? Do we know how that potentially affects Montgomery County's budget?
So we're actually going to make an assessment of to what extent are we dependent, both in terms of grant funding that comes to us directly, or grant funding that comes to us as a pass through from the state. We get money sometimes not directly, but through the state. So we're going to see where we sit with that, and we'll do an assessment of, I think we know pretty well how many federal workers there are and what agencies they're in. And we should be able to figure out which agencies are targeted. You can kind of guess. I mean, it's this probably CDC, NIH, FDA. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to be on the chopping block. So, well, Department of Education, how can I forget that? So we're going to do an assessment, because we need to think about, as we go into the budget, where are our greatest vulnerabilities. And we'll look at what we think the impact's going to be on the state, because the state does things where they don't necessarily passing through money, but they run programs that we ultimately benefit from. And we're going to have to figure out what the risk is in those programs as well. But I mean, if he does anything serious, like either shutting down those agencies or moving the agencies out of Washington, D.C. to basically a long distance from here, it will have an impact. And I mean, just imagine if those people stay here without a federal job, they're unemployed, and we can be pretty sure those jobs are not widely available in the current job market. It's not like they're going to step out of the federal government and get another equally well-paying job. If they leave, then their housing becomes available. But if there aren't people here with the income sufficient to pay for the housing, we may well wind up with a bunch of houses that don't move, or people who own the houses who aren't able to move the houses on the market and have to make some really difficult decisions. So those are the things we're worried about. These are issues that, COG is well aware of. We've often talked about our dependence on the federal government. I mean, the good thing is we've tried to move more and more of our efforts in the non-federal direction to base our economy more on the sciences and, what we can do with life sciences. It's not clear at all whether the president is friendly to medical work and medical research. So we'll see how that all plays out. But we're worried. Everybody else in the region is worried.
But even those moves to things like the life sciences, I mean, those have federal government impacts because of potential for grants and other funding.
Yeah.
I mean, is it fair to say, you mentioned the dependence the county has? I mean, is it fair to say that Montgomery County is effectively a company town when it comes to federal government and grants and employment?
I think less so than it used to be. I mean, if you know the history of Montgomery County, it grew in the late 50s and early 60s after DC integrated, and there was a mass exodus of people out of DC into the suburbs. I don't think you know this, but at one point, Silver Spring advertised itself as moved to Silver Spring. It's still segregated. Not exactly something you'd be very proud of today, but that was the selling point of the county back then. And so we were much more dependent then, because we had this large influx of workers. Over time, we've attracted, a few major corporate headquarters like Choice and Marriott. We've got a, large biotech presence here. NIH has grown to be a very large institution, which I don't so much think is government, but as a research institution. So we've diversified somewhat. I'd say we're much less dependent than we were before, but it's still a large number of people, large enough to make a dent in what we collect in income taxes and property taxes.
Final question. What kind of options does the county have potentially to offset some of this negative impact should it manifest itself?
I mean, the option no one would want to do is probably raise taxes to make up for lost revenues. The way we're structured right now, the bulk of those taxes would land on residents, and we would have to walk a very fine line. There's always been a hesitance here to raise taxes on the residential side of the equation, and the ability to do this is going to pretty much lie on people's recognition that if we aren't willing to do some things, we may well lose services that we all value. So there's no easy answer to this. I wish I could just say, I'll turn this other switch on and money will flow. If we could have done that, we would have done it a long time ago. So there are going to be challenges. We're going to have to deal with them.
Thank you, Brian. Kate Ryan, WTOP.
Thank you very much. Shifting to a slightly more local impact, the ballot initiative that limits terms. This is the second time since 2016 that there's been an effort, and apparently successful, to limit the terms of the county executive. This means in your next 2 years, you have a shot at completing your agenda. What's at the top of your agenda for that? And will you run for public office again in the future?
I may. I haven't decided anything, but it's certainly on the list of options in the universe. The bigger issue is, we're going to, first of all, try to change the tax structure here so it's fair to residents, but also gives the county the capacity to build the infrastructure we need. We're simply, regardless of who the next executive is, if we're not able to build infrastructure here, we are going to continue to lag behind Northern Virginia. And if I had more time, or we didn't have this discussion again, I would just point out that Virginia went a different path than us, around 2013, and they invoked these very large taxes on the private sector to raise money to build infrastructure to spark economic development. And that's exactly what they did successfully. And through that whole time, and I was on the council during that period, the council absolutely refused to do anything parallel that would have put us in a competitive position. And so you can already see what the difference makes. And it's, to me, it's troubling. And, we need to get off the dime and make some tough decisions there. That's, to me, that's one of the big issues. Trying to deal with school funding. School funding is going to be a big issue because, we ran into a buzzsaw with last budget with the amount of imbalance in the health part of their school budget. They're going to have to deal with that. We've got the blueprint, and in an environment where the school doesn't have revenues and the county may have limited revenues, the pressure on meeting the demands of the blueprint, will only get greater. Affordable housing is another area that we've been able to make progress in, and we want to continue to make progress in. I'm optimistic we can find ways to do some of these things. We've been able to partner with developers pretty successfully in some cases in terms of getting more affordable housing. And I think there are more developers who are realizing you've got to provide housing, not just for the wealthy, but you've got to provide housing for the workforce that we're trying to attract here. So I was very happy to see Park and Planning's reversal on the project in Pike and Rose, where their first reaction was to oppose his rezoning to lower density but more affordability. They ultimately wound up supporting more affordability, but we're going to need more things like that. So I think those are, I guess I could make a list. Mental health issues. We're still dealing with, both at the youth level and young adult level, issues of mental health. We've always had very limited services because these are primarily seen as state issues, but clearly the state's not going to be able to step in as much as we'd like. And I don't blame it on anybody. If you don't have revenue, you don't have revenue. We're going to be facing the same kind of decisions. How much is it worth to us to improve the services we have for people in mental health distress? So there's a small list of things that I think we need to do. And I don't know if you finish everything in 2 years, but the goal is to get things started and to get them started with enough council support that you can ensure that you'll stay down this path after, you go into the next election. This is the problem. If you had 6 years to do this, you could be pretty sure that you could pull this off. But if you got an election in between and many different people who may have very different ideas contesting for it, and I do expect multiple people to contest for the executive, there's no guarantee that the things we've tried to do are going to get continued.
Got it. And in terms of the term limits on the county executive would be 2, and that's it. The current law that limits county council members to 3 terms, that's 3 consecutive terms. Would you, who you have served 3 consecutive terms, would you be able to come back for a 4th under the current law?
Yeah, because it's consecutive. And so obviously I've been county executive twice. So under the current law, I could do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any other questions for county officials and the county executive this afternoon? No more questions? Going once? Twice? I guess we're done for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe and we'll see you next time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Mhm.